Imagine waking in a world where the walls are solid, the sky is real, and every face you recognize feels anchored in truth. Yet behind your eyes a silent architect is editing the scene, softening some memories, sharpening others, hiding fears beneath logic, dressing desire as destiny, and calling it all reality. The outside world may bruise you, betray you, and test you, but it is your own mind that can build a prison with no bars, a battlefield with no enemy, a dream so convincing that even doubt becomes part of the illusion. Every choice you have made may have been guided by stories you never chose, by wounds you forgot, by patterns older than your name. And the most unsettling part is that the voice you trust the most may not be telling you the truth. So as this journey begins, look closely at your thoughts as they rise and vanish, because somewhere in that flicker between memory and imagination, between fear and certainty, you may discover that the greatest mystery is not what the world is hiding from you, but what your own mind has been hiding in plain sight. Your brain does not show reality, it stages a private film in the dark, stitched from sparks, memories, fears, hunger, expectation, and the restless music of the body. Light strikes the eyes, pressure touches the skin, air trembles in the ears, yet none of these arrive as the world itself. They arrive as signals, thin and coded, like messages from a distant shore, and the brain becomes both translator and director. It guesses before it knows, fills gaps before you notice them, paints color where there is only wavelength, builds sound where there is only vibration, creates solidity from emptiness, and calls the whole performance now. This is not a failure. It is the miracle that lets you move through chaos without drowning in it. You see a face in a crowd because the brain is searching for meaning. You feel time stretch during fear because survival bends the clock. You remember the past as if opening a door, yet each memory is rebuilt, lit again, edited again, made useful rather than perfectly true. The world you experience is not a mirror. It is a negotiation between what is outside and what your nervous system believes will matter next. Every color, every taste, every ache, every beloved voice is shaped by prediction. Reality may be vast, silent, and indifferent, but inside your skull it becomes intimate, urgent, and alive. This means you are never simply receiving existence. You are participating in its appearance. The sunset is not only in the sky, it is also in the architecture of your perception. The stranger is not only a stranger, but a story your brain begins before you speak. The self you carry is also a construction, a moving center of gravity made from sensation, memory, and desire. To realize this is not to lose the world, but to meet it with humility. Behind every certainty there is a hidden artist. Behind every instant there is interpretation. And behind the familiar surface of life, there is a profound mystery, that the universe you know is always passing through you before it becomes real. The memory illusion begins in a quiet room of the mind, where yesterday waits like a film left trembling in the projector light. We believe we return to the past as travelers, opening a door to a place that remains unchanged. Yet every remembered street has been repaved by longing, fear, shame, and desire. A childhood kitchen glows warmer than it ever was. A goodbye sounds sharper than the voice that first spoke it. A face we loved becomes clearer after it has vanished from reach. Memory does not preserve the world, it performs it, each recollection a new scene shaped by the person we have become. In that private cinema, the dead can smile again, lost summers can bloom beneath impossible suns, and old wounds can reopen with the precision of fresh glass. Still, the illusion is not a betrayal. It is the way the soul survives its own passage through time. Without this fragile art, we would be only witnesses to our lives, not authors, not mourners, not dreamers. Perhaps truth is not a stone hidden under dust, but a flame that changes as it burns, lighting different corners of the same dark room. So when a memory rises, vivid and certain, we should greet it with wonder rather than obedience. It may not show us exactly what happened, but it reveals what still matters, and sometimes that is the deeper mystery. At the edge of a sleepless city, where rain turns every window into a trembling screen, a person may look into the dark and find a face forming in the glass, not because the face is there, but because the mind is a restless artist, forever sketching meaning onto silence. We see shapes in clouds, figures in shadows, messages in coincidence, ghosts in empty rooms, and sometimes these visions comfort us. Sometimes they frighten us, yet they always reveal how deeply we hunger for pattern. The world arrives as fragments, light, sound, memory, fear, desire, and somewhere behind the eyes, a hidden theater stitches them into a story before we can stop it. A coat on a chair becomes a crouching stranger. A branch tapping the window becomes a warning. A voice remembered too vividly seems to cross the room. In those moments, reality does not vanish, it bends, and we stand between what is given and what is made, between the cold fact of the room and the warm storm of imagination. Seeing things that are not there can be a crack in the wall of certainty, but it can also be the birthplace of art, faith, invention, and longing. Every painting begins as an unseen image. Every journey begins as a place not yet reached. Every lost love returns first as a presence in the air. Perhaps the mind is not simply a mirror held up to the world, but a lantern, casting its own light onto the unknown, filling emptiness with monsters, angels, maps, and memories. To see what is not there is to be reminded that perception is never passive, that each of us walks through a private cinema while pretending to share the same street. And when the dawn finally breaks, and the shadow becomes only a coat, and the ghost becomes only dust, something remains, a quiet unease, a wonder, a question that follows us into the day, asking whether we have ever seen the world as it truly is, or only the version our minds could bear to create. Every choice you make feels like a small act of freedom, a hand reaching through the fog toward what seems obvious, reasonable, and yours. Yet beneath that confident motion, invisible currents are already moving. Your mind is not a quiet courtroom where facts speak in equal measure. It is a crowded theater, lit by memory, fear, desire, pride, and the old stories you have mistaken for truth. Confirmation bias pulls the spotlight toward evidence that agrees with you, while the rest fades into shadow. Availability bias makes the vivid feel common, so one frightening story can outweigh a mountain of calm statistics. Anchoring bias plants a number, a first impression, or a careless comment in the ground, and every judgment afterward bends around it like grass in wind. Loss aversion whispers that losing hurts more than winning heals, so you cling to failing plans, draining relationships, and familiar discomfort, not because they are good, but because leaving them feels like stepping off a cliff. The halo effect lets one admirable trait brighten an entire person, while the horn effect lets one flaw darken everything they touch. Social proof turns the crowd into a compass, even when the crowd is lost. The sunk cost fallacy keeps you walking down a road simply because you have already walked so far. These biases do not announce themselves as enemies. They arrive dressed as instinct, wisdom, taste, loyalty, and common sense. They make the world feel simpler than it is, and they make you feel more certain than you should. To see them is not to escape being human, but to become a little more awake inside your humanity. The next time a decision feels perfectly clear, pause at the edge of it. Ask what you want to be true, what you are afraid to lose, what first impression is still holding the wheel, and whose voice is echoing inside your certainty. In that pause, the machinery becomes visible. In that visibility, choice begins. Confidence often feels like a bright torch in a dark forest, steady in the hand, warm on the face, convincing us that the path ahead is clear. Yet the flame may reveal only the nearest branches while hiding the cliff beyond them. We trust confidence because it has weight, because a firm voice can sound like evidence, because certainty moves through a room faster than doubt. But the mind is not a courtroom where truth always wins. It is a theater where memory, desire, fear, and pride all compete for the spotlight. A person can be confident because they have studied deeply, but also because they have not seen enough to know what they are missing. This is why beginners sometimes speak with thunder while experts speak with weathered caution. The beginner sees a map, the expert remembers the storms. Confidence is often wrong because it measures how strongly we feel an idea, not how carefully we have tested it. It rises from familiar stories, repeated assumptions, and the seductive comfort of being able to explain the world without changing ourselves. It can be inflated by applause, by power, by belonging to a crowd that rewards agreement more than accuracy. It can also come from survival, from the old instinct that hesitation is danger, that action matters more than precision when shadows move in the grass. In modern life, that ancient instinct still breathes inside us, making quick judgments look like wisdom and making complexity feel like weakness. The confident mind often edits the evidence before we notice, keeping what flatters the belief and discarding what disturbs it, like a film director cutting every scene that ruins the hero. Yet reality is not loyal to our narration. It waits, patient and immense, until the moment when the locked door opens the wrong way, the prediction fails, the trusted road vanishes into fog. The tragedy is not that confidence exists, because without it we might never begin anything brave. The tragedy is when confidence refuses to kneel before evidence. The wiser kind of confidence is quieter, more like a lantern than a torch, bright enough to move forward, humble enough to notice when the ground changes. It understands that doubt is not the enemy of strength, but one of its finest instruments. To be truly clear-eyed is to act with courage while leaving room for surprise, to hold beliefs as tools rather than crowns, to remember that the universe is always larger than the feeling of being right. Every morning before the world has fully arrived, your brain begins its secret work, stitching scraps of light, memory, fear, desire, and habit into a story convincing enough for you to call it reality. A face in the crowd becomes a threat because it resembles someone who once wounded you. A delayed message becomes rejection because silence has learned to wear that mask. A sudden ache becomes prophecy, a glance becomes judgment, a coincidence becomes fate. You move through the day inside a film that is being written as it is projected, and the narrator sounds so much like you that you rarely question the script. Yet the brain is not a liar in the ordinary sense. It is a survivor, a restless director trying to predict the next scene before it arrives, filling darkness with monsters so you will not walk unguarded, filling emptiness with meaning so you will not feel lost. It takes fragments and builds cathedrals. It takes shadows and invents enemies. It takes longing and paints futures bright enough to chase. Sometimes these stories save you. Sometimes they imprison you. The same imagination that helps you recognize danger can also make a cage from an old embarrassment, can turn a childhood lesson into a lifelong sentence, can persuade you that the horizon is a wall. To wake up is not to stop the stories, because the mind will always tell them. To wake up is to notice the storyteller. It is to pause when the music swells, when the heart races, when the evidence is thin but the feeling is immense, and gently ask what else might be true. In that pause, the film flickers. The villain may become a stranger having a difficult day. The failure may become a turning point. The abandoned road may become an invitation. You discover that perception is not a window, but a canvas, and every moment is painted by a hand you can learn to steady. The stories your brain invents are powerful, but they are not always final. Somewhere between impulse and belief, between memory and meaning, there is a quiet room where you can choose a different ending. To be completely objective would be to see the world as if no one were looking, to stand outside your own skin, outside memory, language, desire, fear, and the quiet gravity of everything you have ever lived. Yet every act of seeing begins somewhere. A face appears in a doorway, and before thought has finished forming, the mind has already lit it with old meanings. A street at dusk is not only stone and shadow, it is every street you have walked, every departure you remember, every danger you were taught to expect. Objectivity is the dream of a clear window, but the glass is always touched by breath. Still, this does not make truth impossible. It makes truth demanding. We can move closer to objectivity by testing our impressions, listening to witnesses we do not resemble, measuring what can be measured, admitting what we want to be true, and returning again and again to the evidence when pride asks us to look away. Complete objectivity may belong to no human mind, because a mind is not a camera floating in empty space. It is a living history searching for meaning. But the pursuit of objectivity is one of our noblest disciplines, because it asks us to become larger than instinct, more patient than certainty, and more honest than comfort. Perhaps the goal is not to erase the self, but to know the self so clearly that its shadows no longer pretend to be light. At the edge of every life, there comes a moment when the painted sky begins to tremble, when the golden doors of certainty reveal the shadows behind them, and the world that once felt solid turns thin as mist. We walk for years through rooms built from borrowed fears, inherited desires, and bright promises placed in our hands before we ever learned to question their weight. We chase applause as if it were sunrise, gather possessions as if they could anchor the soul, and mistake the noise of the crowd for the voice within. Yet beneath the spectacle, beneath the glittering cities and restless screens, something patient waits, a quiet truth calling from a place untouched by performance. Escaping the illusions is not an act of running away. It is the slow and courageous turning of the eyes toward what has always been real. It begins when we stop worshiping the masks we have worn for survival, when we allow silence to enter like moonlight through a broken roof, illuminating not failure but freedom. The cage was never only made of walls. It was made of stories we repeated until they sounded like fate. To awaken is to see the strings, to feel the stage beneath the dream, and still choose to live with tenderness. Beyond the illusion there is no perfect kingdom waiting, only the raw and radiant texture of existence, breath, grief, wonder, love, and the strange mercy of beginning again. In that clearing, we do not become larger than life. We become honest enough to finally enter it. You can trust less than you wish, but more than you fear. Memory is not a vault. It is a candlelit room where shadows move each time you enter. The senses are not windows. They are translators, shaping the world into signals the body can survive. Thought itself is not a pure river. It is weather, crossed by old fears, hidden loyalties, borrowed desires, and stories planted so deeply they feel like instinct. Yet this does not leave you empty-handed. You can trust the act of returning, again and again, to attention. You can trust careful doubt, the kind that does not destroy meaning but cleans the lens. You can trust what survives comparison, conversation, patience, and humility. You can trust the quiet friction between what you believe and what reality refuses to become. The mind may not be a throne of truth, but it can become a lantern, imperfect, flickering, and still capable of lighting the next step. Perhaps wisdom begins when certainty loses its crown, and you learn to walk through the dark not by pretending to see everything, but by noticing how easily the dark can wear your own face.